Once again, let's open up our Bibles to 1 Corinthians chapter 13. Well, how many would say we live in an uncertain world? Uncertain world? Yeah, you don't know what's going to happen next. I found something, though, that is absolutely certain in our uncertain world. That is, we have to deal with the faults and failures of other people, don't we? That's for certain. That's for certain. Think about your spouse. Think about your children. Faults and failures all around. Think about your coworkers. Think about your fellow church members. Think about our politicians. Everybody's got faults and failures, including me up here preaching every week. We all have faults and failures, and we have to deal with that. And one of the great things that parents need to do is teach their children how to successfully deal with faults and failures of other people as you come across them in this world, which, as you know, can be the most frustrating and difficult things of life. Sometimes we deal with it very badly, and we lose our temper and scream and shout. Other times we just, go and complain and grouse and hold bitterness and unforgiveness and resentment to another person. Sometimes we just write a person off and want nothing to ever do with them again, and just they're a hopeless person. What does God say is the right way to deal with it? Because God's way is the right way to deal with it. He deals with a world full of people with faults and failures, and He has the right way to deal with it. And it's often not what we are used to doing or seeing. That's what we're going to look at this morning. Principles from God's Word on the right way of dealing with people's faults and failures. Could you stand a little help in that area? I know I appreciated this week, and I've had to say, okay, I need to do better in certain areas in dealing with the faults and failures of others. We have to face it, but we can face it at least the best way that God says. That's what we're going to be looking at this morning. By way of review, God's greatest command is to love others, Him first and other people after that. And we have found that in 1 Corinthians 13, God tells us what a life of love looks like. God can just say love, and He does. But exactly how do we apply that into our lives? Well, as we've been seeing, a life of love looks like in 1 Corinthians verses 3 through 7. And we started off with these qualities. This is what a life of love looks like. And we've noted, as we've gone through this, that it really sorts into two columns, the do column and the don't column. It'd be nice if God just said, let me just give you all the don'ts or just all the do's, but He kind of mixes them together. And so we've filled in the other side. So when it says love is patient, we've filled in the other half, which is it's not impatient, or love is kind, and love is not unpleasant. And so we, in our study here, have just filled out these two columns of what God says love is. What does living a life of love look like? It looks like this. What is Jesus like? He's like this. What are we to be like? This. God is moving each of us into this character through all the disciplines and training of our lives. This is the goal. I think He wants us being like Him and living lives of love. We looked last week where God kind of stops with the specifics here, and He says, let me just give you the general principles here. We could keep going, the list could go on, but let me give you what the principles are. And verse 6 teaches us that love cherishes what is right. That's what that column is talking about. And the summary of the other column is that love hates what's bad. It's pretty much that simple. We said last week, love hates certain things. And what is sinful and bad, love hates. Because why? Sin is a wrecking ball that crashes and destroys people's lives. And love hates that. Because what is love's goal? Love's great goal is others' welfare. Seeking others' welfare is the definition of the love that God talks about for us to do. Well, today we come to the last four descriptions in this list here, which is here in our verses. And we want to look at those, and as I've urged you every week, look deeply into your life at these things. We can just read them and move on. I think oftentimes we do that with the chapter of 1 Corinthians 13. Read through what it says and then move on to the next chapter, rather than really taking each one and reflecting on it. And that's what I'd like to do with these four that we're going to be looking at this morning. So think about the different people that you're dealing with that are particularly difficult right now with their faults and failures. And then as we go through these, see how they apply to that person or persons going on in your life so that you can improve. God is taking us by the hand here and leading us higher and higher on how to deal with people better and better. So let's look at this. Let's begin looking at verse 7, where we've come to in our study. Verse 7, the New American Standard says this: love bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things. Love bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things. All right, let's look at the principles involved here for dealing with other people's faults and failures. Principle number 1 is difficult to understand. There are 2 reasons this is difficult to understand, and one is just the simple translation of this verse is not simple. I'll put this up. The New American Standard and the King James Version and the ESV say, love bears all things, bears all things. NIV comes along and it says, love always protects. And you say, well, wait a minute. Which one of those is right? Well, the answer is both of them are right. And that's what makes this verse, at least this principle, a challenge, is because the Greek word, Paul wrote in Greek, and the Greek word he used here, the root of the Greek word is the word roof. You could say love roofs all things. And so what in the world is that going after? Well, there's 2 aspects of the word roof that are in this word. The first is the weight-bearing aspect of a roof. This is with the bearing a load on your back. A roof bears weight, the weight of snow on a roof at times. If it's too much, the roof will collapse. But if a roof is doing its job, it's bearing the weight of that pressure coming down on it. So there's a weight-bearing aspect to a roof. There's also to a roof a covering aspect, right, that protects the family and the furniture and what's going on in the house, a covering aspect. Both those are in this word, this Greek word, a weight-bearing aspect and a covering protective aspect. And that's why these different translations seem to be so different, because they're choosing one side or the other. If we combine them together, it would say something like this: love bears the burden, the weight, of covering others. Protecting others. Love bears the weight of covering or protecting others. That's what this first principle is, and it's actually very well spelled out in 1 Peter 4:8. It says, keep fervent in your love for one another, because love, there's the word, covers a multitude of sins. Love covers a multitude of sins. So what is the first principle here? The first principle here deals with this situation. The situation is that you learn about another person's fault. You learn about another person's fault. It may be a rumor that's going around the office, or you read it in the newspaper in a headline on some tabloid. You learn about another person's fault. What does a life of love do when that happens? This says that you cover their faults. You cover their faults. Okay? You don't spread gossip. That would be the opposite. That's uncovering their faults and displaying it for all the world to see. So in a situation where you hear about someone else's faults, what do? And we do that all the time, right? Because our culture loves to learn about other people's faults, right? It's sold millions of dollars of magazines and television and special episodes on whatever. Someone was found out doing something wrong, and now everybody's talking about it. It's the first thing on Facebook, first thing on Twitter. Our politicians hire people to find dirt on their rivals, right? And they go into their background, they talk to their neighbors, they look up every possible thing in order to expose it, to uncover it, to cause as much damage as possible so that they can get a victory. We have people at the office who are reporting and ratting on other people who are doing wrong things, not because they care about the welfare of the company, but because they want to get another employee in trouble so that they won't be considered for a raise, and they will be considered for that position, and expose trouble, expose problems that go on. Millions and millions of people buy tabloid supermarket magazines because they're splashing up front the latest scandal that some celebrity has done for all the world to see. That's what love doesn't do. Let me ask you, what do you want? What do these people who are doing all this, what do they want done about their faults and failures? Do they want the world to publicly know about all their faults and failures? Or would they appreciate it that if someone learned about one of their faults and failures, they covered it over and protect it from public gaze? Absolutely, there's no question about that. If you want to measure your love for another person, it can be by how quick you are to cover over their faults when they become known. That brings us to a second difficulty with this passage, or rather, this verse. And that is, how many things are to be covered over, according to this? Love bears, covers, protects. How many? All things. All things. All right. Does that mean that we just ignore other people's sins and failures? That we just, pretend they don't happen? Someone does something really outrageous, and we got to say, well, love covers over this stuff. We just don't deal with it. Okay, that's what the Bible says. Is that what the Bible says? Let me teach you a principle about how to interpret a passage. When you come across the word all, and I've looked up a great deal of them this week, the word all is found everywhere in the Bible. All over the place is the word all. It can become a problem because there are two senses that you can interpret the word all. One is all with no exceptions. All with no exceptions, which is what we would normally think. All with no exceptions. And the other way is all with some exceptions. All with some exceptions. And you're saying, what are you talking about, Pastor? Let me give you some examples. Romans 3:23. For all have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. How many, which one of those is this here? All with no exceptions or all with some exceptions? Has no exceptions. How do we know that? How do we know it's not just saying there are a few good people? Because there are tons of other passages that say everyone's a sinner, everyone is guilty in the eyes of God. And this is just another one saying the same thing, so it lines up. All with no exceptions are sinners in the world. Then you have Matthew 12:30. It says, love the Lord your God with all your heart. Is that love with some exceptions or no exceptions? No exceptions. All your heart. That's how much you're supposed to love God. Let me show you another one. It says, put your sword, Matthew 26:52, put your sword back into its place, for all those who take up the sword shall perish by the sword. Is that all with no exceptions or all with some exceptions? Some exceptions. This is the general rule. Jesus is speaking in hyperbole here. He's exaggerating to make the point. There's a general rule in life. If you live by violence, you'll probably end by violence. That's just the way it goes. But are there some exceptions to that? Are there some people who have lived violent lives who didn't end up being killed violently? Yeah, we can think of lots of soldiers, veterans, people who didn't live, may have picked up a sword. Even a criminal didn't pick up a sword or a gun, but didn't die by a gun. So this is a general thing. And the all here is not all in every possible way, but all with some exceptions. Let me show you another one. Luke 8:37. And all the people of the country of the Gerasenes and the surrounding district asked him to leave. How many people asked him to leave? Well, they all did. Does that mean every man, woman, and child left their homes, stood in line with Jesus and said, would you leave? Would you leave? Would you leave? You leave. You leave. Did everybody? Probably not. This is probably the second interpretation of all with some exceptions. The majority of people wanted him to leave. The majority of people made it known, we want you to leave. But whether or not every single person lined up and did that probably doesn't need to be pressed on this. This is probably Jesus saying, with some exceptions, everybody wanted him to leave. So let's apply this to our verse here. We can translate it, love covers all faults. So is that all with no exceptions or all with some exceptions? And based on other passages of Scripture, we know that this is all with some exceptions. Because the Bible talks about other Christians when they fall into sin. Remember, we talked about this last week. When another Christian falls into the trap of sin, we are to go and help them get out of that trap. Just like if someone has a foot in a bear trap, you don't just walk by and say, that's none of my business, I don't want to get involved, that's, between them and God. No, you would help them out. And God says the same thing. Jesus says the same thing. In Matthew 18:15 it says, if your brother sins, go and show him his fault. Go and uncover the fact that you know about his fault, but do it in private. You don't go into the tabloids or Facebook. You go and talk to him alone in private about his fault. Remember, what is love's emotional reaction to sin? Hatred. Why would love hate? Because sin is a wrecking ball that destroys people's lives. So when you see it in my life or someone else's life, you don't just say, well, it's not a big deal. We're not going to worry about the fact that he's clearly sinning and doesn't care about it. No, you'd say, I care about you. In fact, love says, your interest, your welfare is my job in this life. So I will lovingly move toward you, not in condemnation, but with gentleness and kindness, and help you get out of your trap. What if a person doesn't listen to the loving help of another Christian? Well, Jesus says then you take 2 or 3 others along with you to be able to help them out. 2 or 3 others then are, that lid is off and it's being uncovered so that they now know about the sin, but it's not to harm the person, it's to help the person. And what if the person continues to resist and say, I'm still not going to listen to this. I know it's clear sin, but I'm not changing. Then Jesus says this in 1 Timothy 5:20, those who continue in sin sharply correct in the presence of all, so that the rest also will be fearful of sinning. So here's a principle. Love covers all faults, protects all faults, but there are some exceptions to this. And that is when a Christian has been caught in a sin and they don't see the way, they're not listening to reason. You go with just a few, uncover it to them, then go to the rest of the congregation and uncover it to them, not because you're trying to harm them, but because you're trying to help them come to their senses, confess their sin before God, and get back in a right relationship with Him. So think of a person that you have trouble with their faults and failures. Oftentimes it's our family members because we step on each other's toes all the time. What does living a life of love do for that? First of all, it covers over their sins. It covers over the sin instead of spreading them in gossip. There might be someone at work and you've heard something about them. Cover it over, okay? Don't spread it around. Don't go into the break room and tell everyone what happened. Don't grouse about your spouse to the people that you're close to. Cover over their sin. Isn't that what you would want done for you with your faults and failures? Instead of making them public, wouldn't you like those who learn about those things to just cover them over? And of course the exception is when those faults and failures become a clear sin that is not going away and that needs to be dealt with. And then you do it in great love. So living a life of love means covering over the faults and failures of others. Do you need to change anything in that area? Do you need to change anything in that area? Do more covering when it's appropriate. Maybe there's someone that you know there's a clear sin and you do need to approach them. That's the loving thing to do. Ask God for wisdom. Ask God for courage. Lovingly, we have to be each other's safety nets for when we step off the path. That might be something God is putting upon your heart as well. All right, the second principle for dealing with others' faults and failures, look back at verse 7. Verse 7 again says, love bears all things, that is, covers the faults. And then second, love believes all things. Love believes all things. How many of you have ever heard that the earth is actually flat? That the government has, for years, doctored up all the different photos we see of a round world, all of them, and because the world is actually flat, and it's just a conspiracy to make people think that the world is round. Have you heard that? Yeah. Did you believe that? Now wait a minute, it says right here, love believes all things. Okay? So what is this saying? Is that right? I got to believe the earth's flat now. Note here, this chapter is talking about personal relationships. It's not talking about all the different claims that people make on the internet or down at the barber shop. You don't have to believe everything. In fact, that's being gullible. Love loves the truth, okay? And it recognizes that there's some things that are false. So this does not say you got to believe everything you hear. That's the opposite of being loving. What's going on here is it's talking about personal relationships. So the situation is, number one, another is accused of a fault. You have someone who's accused of a fault. The previous thing is that you hear a rumor about a fault. This one is someone's actually accused of a fault. So maybe there's someone at work who has been fired. No reasons are given for why they've been fired. And what do people tend to do when there's a blank for why something like that happens? They tend to fill it in. What does love fill in the blank with? Love, it says, believes the best about the person. Love believes the best about a person. Love does not assume the worst about a person. Okay? So someone at work gets fired, no explanation is given, and then everybody immediately tries to fill in the blank, and you know it. It's usually with the worst. Well, I bet it was about drugs. I bet she was taking drugs. Or, she lied to me one time. I bet it was about a lie. And I bet she was probably caught stealing something and then lied about it and she got fired. Yep, I'm sure that's what it was. When there's no facts, when nothing's been proven. But isn't that what people tend to do? Isn't that the way our world works? People tend to jump to the worst possible thing that could happen about another person. That's not what love does. Love looks at a situation, and even if they think, yeah, this person maybe has had a problem with lying in the past, it gives them the benefit of the doubt. Okay? It allows it to stay a question mark rather than jumping in by saying, I know what happened here. She lied in the past, she got fired for lying again, and you assume the worst about the person. No. Love says, it may end in the fact that she did lie, but I'm not going to start with that conclusion. I'm going to believe the best about that. Being cynical is the opposite. It's assuming the worst about a person. It's saying, okay, yeah, she lied in the past. Absolutely, she lied this time. No doubt about it. And, look, that may end up being 100% true, that she got fired because she lied. But love doesn't start with that. Love says, you know what? We don't know all the facts. So we're going to believe the best motive to start with. And that might end up being proven wrong, but until it's proven wrong, we're going to believe the best about this person. That's what love does. And again, isn't that what you and I would want if we were accused of something? You were accused of something, it's not true, but everybody jumps to the conclusion that it's absolutely true and accuses you as well and thinks you're guilty. You don't want that. And love says, do to others as you want them to do to you. So don't do that to other people. Even though you're really sure it probably did, don't start there. Don't start there. You might say, well, let me ask you, can you think of someone who has been accused of something? Probably. What does a life of love do? Believe the best about them until it's proven otherwise. Believe the best about them until it's proven otherwise. Don't assume the worst. Living a life of love means you give a person a break and allow that doubt to remain a doubt until it's proven wrong. Is there anyone that you need to change that with? Anyone who's been accused of something and you hastily rush to judgment against them? Back up and believe the best about them until you know it's different. That's the second principle for dealing with others, faults and failures. Third principle for dealing with all these faults and failures. Looking at verse 7, it says, love bears all things. Number 2, love believes all things. Number 3, love hopes all things. What is hope? How would you define hope? Hope. Hope is the expecting the future is going to get better. That's what hope is. Hopelessness is expecting that the future is not going to get better. Hope, the future is going to get better. Look at this verse. It says here in 1 Timothy 4:10, we work hard and suffer much. Our hope, our belief that the future is going to get better is in the living God, who is the Savior of all people. Are we putting our expectation that the future is going to get better in the government? Anybody? How about in your health? How about in your smarts? It's going to get better because I got this. God says, no. Do not put your hope in those things. How about your wealth? I got some money put away. The future is going to be bright. Look what Paul says to Timothy, 1 Timothy 6:17, tell those who are rich in this present world not to be proud and nor put their hope in wealth. The future is going to get better because of my wealth, which is so uncertain. But to put their hope that the future is going to get better in God. Yeah. If you're a Christian and you're worried about your future this morning, stop it. You understand? Stop it. That's a sin. If you're looking at your future and you're worried, that's a sin. Stop it. God says, I want you to be confident because you placed your hope that the future is going to get better in me. Not in the government, not in your wealth, not in your health, not in your smarts. The future is going to get better because of me, God says. And your future is going to get better because of me. And so be confident. God is the one who knows what's coming. We didn't see anything coming in 2020. God saw all that coming. And God sees what's coming in 2021. And he not only sees it, he controls all of it. Absolutely controls all of it. How much is going to land on you? And God promises, I'm only going to put the things that land on you when it is ultimately for your good. All the other stuff, I'm keeping it out. The stuff that is ultimately for good, I'm going to allow that to land on you. And it may be very dark. And it may be very hard and lead you through a very dark valley. But I promise you, it opens up into a beautiful, sunny field on the other side, full of life and flowers and trees. That's where it's headed. That's the hope. Your life is going to end in what's really great, even though it goes through a dark time right now. So if you're struggling with worry about your future, kill it. That is unbelief. God says your hope that the future is going to get better is placed in him who knows, controls, and loves you. And you can be at peace about that. Now, this verse here says the situation goes like this. Another person is guilty of a fault. This is where a person isn't just you hear about them doing something or that they are accused of something. This is where they have done something. They are flat out guilty. She stole the money and then lied about it. That's why she was fired. What does love do in a situation like that? Love sees their future getting better. Love does not give up on them. Love sees their future getting better. Love does not give up on them. That's what love does. Sees their future getting better. Listen, it's very easy to give up on people that have had a track record of failing and failing and failing. You know, they made the promises time and time again and broke those promises. They said they'd be there for you and they weren't there for you. And so after a while you just say, forget it. I'm not trusting you anymore. I'm not going to have anything to do with you. You're hopeless. Love doesn't do that. Love always says there's a way for things to get better for them. I'm not going to write them off. I'm not going to give it up. It's easy to become cynical with people and just cross them off our list and say never again. Love doesn't do that. Love hopes. Love says, you know what? As bad as it's been, I'm still going to believe that it can get better. It may not get better. They may die and it never got better, but I'm going to believe that that person can change and that things can get better. Even as bad as a bad person can be, I'm going to believe. Because, again, it's not the way you want people to treat you. Do you want people to just write you off? You know, you made the third fault in a row and I'm just done with you. You're off my list. I don't trust you anymore. I don't want anything to do with you. You don't want people to do that for you. You want them to give you another chance. That's what this is saying. Treat others the way you want to be treated. Now, it doesn't mean you're naive and you expose yourself to all sorts of trouble to a person, but you open up the possibility that they can earn your trust back instead of just crossing them off and saying, you're done. Always leave the door open for a person to have a second chance. Again, you don't have to put yourself in danger, put yourself into their hands and say, yes, you can watch my children for the weekend. It's not something like that. But it means you open the door to the possibility that that person's not completely messed up, that they can change. That's what hope does. You've heard the term throw in the towel. Samuel used that last night. Throwing in the towel is a boxing term. It comes from when the trainers would have a towel, the boxer would come up, wipe off his face with sweat and blood, Then they go out and they box and they box. There used to be a rule, I don't know if there still is, there used to be a rule that as the fighters were fighting and the trainer saw his guy is not doing well, he needs to stop or he's going to be seriously injured, he'd take that towel and he'd throw it in the ring. And guess what? Everything stopped. When he threw in the towel, it ended. And that's what a lot of people do to other people. They throw in the towel and they say, it's over, it's done. No more relationship. Love doesn't do that. Love always hopes that the person will win in the end. Okay? Love always hopes that they'll win. They may not, but it hopes they will. In the book of Jeremiah, God watched Israel just do the worst sins that human beings can do. His chosen people, his holy people, doing the worst sins that people can do. He said he watched them for years, set up altars on every high hill, altars to false god, and burn incense to these false gods. And then down in the valleys, they would build altars and burn their children to death. This is God's holy nation, who he had chosen, the apple of his eye, doing this. And he watched this for years and years, sent them prophet after prophet to change them, turn them, warn them. And finally, in the book of Jeremiah, it says, I've had enough. I'm going to send King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon, and he's going to flatten this temple, this holy place that I've built up to my special presence in your nation. I'm going to flatten Jerusalem. I'm going to execute so many thousands of people, drag off those who are alive over to Babylon. This place is going to be utterly destroyed because of the heaping amount of sins that you have done for so many years. And then, on the eve of this great disaster happening, God comes to Jeremiah and he says, here, Jeremiah 26, verse 2, the Lord said, stand out in front of the temple of the Lord, and make an announcement to the people. Perhaps they will listen and turn from their evil ways. And then I will be able to withhold the disaster I'm ready to pour out on them because of their sins. No matter how bleak a situation looks for a person's life, love hopes that they win. That word perhaps here is a word of hope. Here they were doing the worst imaginable sins human beings could do, and he says, yet perhaps there is hope that they'll, at this very late date, still turn to me and be saved. And that's why he's giving this last word through Jeremiah. Can you think of someone that you're tempted to give up on, to throw the towel in on, to say, they're useless, they don't have it. They failed so many times, broken so many promises, I'm done with them, I write them off. What does a life of love do? It does not do that. It isn't naive to the fact that they could be dangerous with given certain amounts of trust and responsibility. But it also doesn't say, I'm done with them. It leaves the door open for a second chance, a chance to gain trust back. It doesn't write a person off. Is there someone in your life that you've written off that you need to back up on? That you need to, at least in your own mind, think, there's always hope. As long as they're alive, there's hope that they can change and things can get better. Love always hopes and doesn't give up on people. Do you need to change anything in that area about someone you know? Well, let's look at the last principle. We said that there's 15 descriptions in these verses. This is the very last one. Verse 7 says, love bears all things, love believes all things, love hopes all things. And the last one, love endures all things. Think of something in your head right now that you have to endure. What is something that you have to endure? Can you think of something that you just, I got to endure it? How many of you thought of an ice cream sundae? No, we don't endure ice cream sundaes because we don't have to endure things that are pleasant, right? Things that are easy. We endure things that are what? Hard, difficult, grueling. Did you ever ask yourself why life has to be so hard? Of course you have. Why does life have to be so hard? Here's the answer. Ready? Because God calls us to live a life of love. And it's hard to live a life of love. It is hard to live a life of love. Living this way, if there's anything that this series of lessons has taught you, it's that living a life of love is not for the faint of heart. Looking at this list, we should gulp and say, really? I've got to do that every day, 100% of the time? This is challenging and difficult. That's why there are few people who take this road. It is hard to live a life of love. This is what Jesus calls the narrow way that leads to life. This really is. If you take all the positive things and put them on here, this is the narrow way. If we take all the negative things, this is stepping off of the narrow way into the wide way that leads to destruction. Jesus says in Matthew 7:14, the gate is small and the way is narrow that leads to life, and few are those who find it. Not many people are willing to walk on this path because it's hard. It is hard, and that's why it requires this last quality. What is the last quality that is needed? Endurance. To stay on this path and keep staying on this path and not step off into the side areas that God forbids takes endurance and perseverance and strength and determination. This is very hard to do. And it's hard for two reasons. It's a two-step process in order to live this way, and we've covered this before. Number one, it requires dying to focusing on my welfare. My life is about my welfare. If you're going to live on this path, you've got to cross that off and die to it. And the focus of your life now becomes other people's welfare. You have to tend to your own welfare in order to seek their welfare. But that's the main purpose of your life now, seeking others' welfare. God first, people second. But that is what living a life of love does. And that's why it's so hard, because you're constantly having to say no, deny, die to yourself. On every situation, your first concern is, what is others' welfare going to be in this situation? And that's why it takes endurance to be able to do this. You cannot stay on this path without endurance. So here's the situation. The situation is, God commands you to live a life of love. God commands you to live a life of love. What love does is it endures in loving others. Because it's hard. You don't endure easy things. You endure hard things. You endure in loving others. What you don't do is you live for yourself. You don't live for yourself any longer. And that's why there are few people on this path. Let's end by just looking at this narrow way here. This really sums up the Christian life, by the way. This is the Christian life. If you want to know what it is, it's this. This is what Jesus Christ calls us to do. This is what He does every single day. This is what He's pulling us up to do every single day. And we stumble and step off the path, but God says don't do it, because this is the way that leads to life. Listen to God's words in Deuteronomy 5:32. 5:32, be careful to walk in all my ways, says the Lord. Do not turn aside to the right or to the left. Do what the Lord your God has commanded you so that you may live and prosper. Walking this narrow way is hard, but this is the way to live and prosper. It's the only way to live and prosper. And He's showing us how to live life. Are you stepping off to the right or the left here? That's what we all need to look deeply at as we've talked through these things, this series of what living a life of love looks like. If you find yourself stepping off to the left or right, easy solution. Confess it as sin and step back onto the path. Get back onto the path. God will quickly forgive you. And then God, Jesus Christ Himself, will walk with you down this path, enabling you to do this, because in our own strength we don't have it, but He has the ability to give you the endurance that you need to give your best to this path every single day. What do you need to change to make sure you're right in the center of this path? What do you need to change? In this series of sermons, God has taken us by the hand and led us to higher and higher levels of understanding and practicing love. We're going to stop with this portion of Scripture today with this sermon, but never let this stop in our focus and our concentration and in our hearts. This is what God has called us to, what he's called each of us to wake up every morning, our feet hit the floor, to live this way. It's living a life of love. May God help us all, and may we commit ourselves to 100% obeying this, 100% of the time. That's the aim.